Welcome to the first episode of the Real Kinetic Fitness Podcast. On this episode, we talk with Dr. Andrew Perrotta about his research in hot yoga, heart rate variability, and also have a discussion about the current health challenges the college student sees today. I really enjoyed my discussion with Andrew, and I hope you enjoy listening as well. So please sit back and enjoy the show. Hi, everyone. Thank you for listening to episode number 1 of the Real Kinetic Fitness Podcast. I'm really excited to get this podcast up and running. It has been an idea of mine for a while now, and it's finally being put into plan and in production. Fortunately, my first guest is the exact person I wanted to bat lead off. It is Andrew Perrotta. Andrew is a researcher, instructor, strength coach, exercise physiologist, family man, a colleague, a gentleman, and a scholar. Thanks so much for joining me today, Andrew.
Glad to be here. That's a very kind intro. Thank you, Brent.
Andrew and I have been colleagues at Langara College for about 3 years now. That's how we've got to know one another, and we've developed a bit of a friendship, lots of many common interests. Two boys is one of those common interests, and we commiserate and and gloat often about the trials and tribulations of fatherhood. So it's nice to have someone like that on your side and in your organization. Andrew and I, in our conversation today, we decided we're going to have a little bit of a bevy today. The two of us like to enjoy beverages after long days. So Andrew, what are you enjoying today?
Well, even though I'm in Edmonton, I really enjoy Vancouver's our home now, local beer. So I'm drinking Perrotta 49's Ruby Tears. I'm a fan of ales. This is a great ale. A little bit higher in alcohol, but it's a good ale. Enjoy it. Nice. Shout out to Perrotta.
Excellent. All right. I am having Perrotta 49 as well. I'm going to have the Trash Panda, the IPA. I'm a big IPA guy, so and I actually enjoy Perrotta 49 beers quite a bit, and their IPA is one of my favorites, the Trash Panda. So cheers, Andrew. Let's get going. Before we dive into some of the topics, I thought maybe you can just give a little bit of an introduction to yourself to the listeners, just kind of a little bit of an idea of who you are, where you come from, maybe a little bit of how you would intro yourself to your class. Just a quick intro and let everyone know who you are.
Okay. Who I am, I'll start with that. I'm an individual who's extremely passionate about the human body and specifically exercise physiology. I think when I hear students come to me, one of the common things that they'll tell me is, Andrew, you're really passionate. I really enjoyed that. And what I take away from that is that I'm just happy that I'm able to make others interested in something that I'm so passionate about, and it comes across that way. I really have enjoyed learning how the body works from more of a comprehensive standpoint, where how does the muscle react to resistance training? How could that fit in with aerobic training? How could you measure the dose to exercise with regards to the response and the recovery rates? Just learning how an athlete works together, because I was always, I think, privy to the fact that we're more than just the purple mitochondria that we see in the textbook. So I love what I do. My wife will tell me all the time, you're very intense. You need to switch off. I can't, and I think that's a blessing and a curse, because all I do is I eat, sleep, I dream about the body and new ways to look at things to help improve either health or performance. More so performance is my area. And I enjoy sharing that with others, and I love working with others who have the same passion, because we connect really easily. I think that's why you and I always kind of clicked from the very beginning as well.
Absolutely.
So how this developed? Well, I was born and raised in Ontario, in Niagara. Don't judge me. For some reason, people out west always talk about they don't like people from Ontario.
It's the
But had
stigma. It's the stigma
yeah,
around
exactly,
Ontario. Yeah.
the capital of Canada. Um, I had a great childhood where I played many sports, but I really enjoyed soccer. And throughout high school, I really didn't care about school. And I think when you're an educator, that's something that most kids, most people probably don't associate that individual with right off the bat. But I really did enjoy school. And what's interesting is that when I left high school, I never thought I'd go to school ever again. I was determined to go play soccer. So I went to the UK, spent some time in Wales and in England, trialed for a couple clubs. Things didn't happen, and I came back and I really had to do a reassessment of where I was. But I realized I love sport. I love soccer. I want to get into coaching, but to make me a great coach, I need to go back to school. And I think I need to learn about the human body. I really enjoy that. I've always been training myself, so I thought it'd make me a better coach. That's how my journey into exercise physiology really started. So I went to my local college because I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't want to jump in straight into a degree program. I did 2 years, got my diploma in fitness and health, really enjoyed that. Then I decided to do a bridging semester to do my honors Bachelor of Science in Kin through Guelph. And that really kind of triggered the spark. And I really enjoyed school for the first time. And it's pretty interesting because when you start dreaming about school and things that you never really cared too much before, you kind of realize, oh, something's changed. I think it's encouraging. It's like somebody trying to lose weight, they lose 5 pounds, and then they're on the wagon, they can kind of push themselves.
Yeah, I remember going through because I had a similar path. I went through Douglas College, so the college system before I went to a university degree granting institution, and because I really didn't know what I wanted to do, and I took just randomly. I think it was my second year at Douglas College. I just randomly took a sports science class, and yeah, it just clicked there. It's like, okay, why haven't I been doing this since day
Yeah.
one? Like, this is my interest. This is what I love to do. This is what I should be doing. And then it just went into from there, just, went into getting into coaching and getting into the kinesiology degree and becoming a strength coach. And it's amazing how it just clicks. And it's nice to hear stories like yours, especially, we teach at a college that is more of a diploma transfer program, and so having instructors like yourself and myself to an extent can show our students, like, this is a good place to start, and it helps you really discover who you are and what you want to do. Some people know right off the bat, others don't, and it's nice to see someone with your background, your experience, take that path, especially for our students.
Yeah, I agree. There's lots of different paths to get to the end goal. Not everybody's is the same, and I think I was the last of the OACs in Ontario, so that was grade 13, and now they've gotten rid of that a long time ago, 2004, I think. So that now you're making decisions in grade 12. How old are you in grade 12? 17?
17, yeah.
Yeah, it's ridiculous what you're gonna, knowing what you or thinking, knowing what you want to do. So it was a little bit of a journey, and the undergraduate part of my degree was phenomenal, really heavy in biochemistry. So I really enjoyed learning about nutrition. Terry Graham was still there. He was phenomenal to listen to, and I did my honors thesis on pre and post workout nutrition for maximizing hypertrophy, muscle hypertrophy. So I was really interested in nutrition, supplementation, and resistance training at the time. And I was also coaching. I was a soccer coach in my local high school for 4 years. And I really, for me, it was all about learning and applying. That was really important to me. Take what I know, apply it. And that I felt like that's what I've been doing throughout my journey. Because after that, I felt like I wasn't done learning, and I wanted to learn more. I was looking at master's programs, but I realized I didn't want to study one thing. I didn't feel like a thesis was right for me. And when I talked to former faculty and instructors, a few of them did the Masters of Kin, specializing in applied exercise physiology at University of Calgary. And when I looked into it, I realized, wow, like people who graduate from here go on to work with NHL teams, NFL teams, world-class, Olympians. These guys, this program was renowned for making physiologists, not researchers, physiologists, strength coaches. Like, this is perfect.
Yeah.
And I did that, and it was probably the most difficult time in my life. I will never do it again. It was that challenging. But I learned so much, and it made me the physiologist I am today, because I continue to learn and apply. So to give you an example, this is why I love working with our exercise phys class at Langara, as we learn it and we throw them in the lab right away.
Yeah.
The first month, we were working with Olympic athletes getting ready to go and try to qualify, during my time at UFC. So they're on the bike, we're doing lactate testing, and it was like, I don't want to mess up. I have an idea what's happening, but to actually apply it, that's the challenge,
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
it forced you to do that, to be uncomfortable, and to learn to be comfortable in uncomfortable positions. So that was probably a pivotal period in my life. But that's also where I started to remove myself from a coaching role with regards to the head coach, and fall in love with physiology and coaching of the athlete. So I was really interested in different techniques for strength training, and also physiology, and combining them. And that's where I think that line just started to develop. The Phoenix came out there.
Yeah.
And the biggest, meeting in my life, I met my wife there. She did the same program. At this time too, I was also developing certifications, much like yourself, the NSCA, CSCS, which, I'm happy to have helped with you to get the NSCA to recognize Langara now for our students to get certified as well, and CSEP, CEP. So I was just accruing these certifications, and they were forced. I didn't want to do these, but everyone was telling me, Angie, you get a degree, you don't get a scope of practice. And I really didn't learn that. I tried to talk to our students about that. I think it's really hard to learn that, and understand that as a student.
It is, especially when you're in school and you're just having so much information thrown at you and you're trying to learn it. And then on top of that, you have the likes of us telling them, well, it doesn't end here. You need to specialize. You need to get that scope of practice. You need to look at getting certifications. The sort of our top students, you're starting to see they understand that, and they're looking more into our NSCA CPT program that we're developing at Langara, and they're more interested in that. And I know with like my strength training class, I had the functional movement screen people come in. I think 4 or 5 students did the certification from that. So I think some are starting to understand it, but it's one of those things where it's just overwhelming because there's so much you need to do and know and think about. And when you're in your first 2 years, it's just like you're just trying to get through it sometimes. And then it doesn't end here, right? Especially in today's world, like a degree might not be enough in 10 years from now.
Yeah. And, the more that I've taught at different institutions, I realized that a degree in kin can be very different from each institution. If you get a certification from an organization, it means that you're confident in a known set of skills, with a known set of knowledge. You know what I mean? That could translate to anywhere, whether it be North America or Canada. So it became a little bit more opening to me to understand that, to realize that, and I'm thankful that people forced me to do that. But I was able to do that at that time, and now I'm trying to pass that knowledge to our kids. And then, at that point, I was working with the Calgary Dinos women's soccer team as an assistant coach and as a physiologist. I was really getting to what I like to tell my students is, much like the Matrix, bend the rules. When you know the principles of science, you have to know at least you have to have a good idea of them before you start playing with them, so nobody gets hurt, obviously. But I really enjoyed experimenting, and in Calgary, we're 1,100 meters. We had Banff there, so we took them to altitude and looked at changes in the blood in girls, and that's female athletes. That's an important aspect. And I was really able to enjoy it, and again, translate my passion for what's happening to the athlete. And I think that's where I see it more now, but having the knowledge, but being able to communicate at a level that the athlete could understand, because they're not all kin students,
Yep.
Is important, because you need the buy-in. You know that as a coach yourself. They need to trust you to do what they need to do, so you both get to where you want to go. So learning how to communicate has been a lifelong development, and it's just been accelerated through the education by applying, applying that.
That's a great point, and it's almost something that isn't really, taught enough at, the post-secondary level, because it's so true. Like, you go and you learn all this information and you apply all this information, and then you get out to the workforce and, you're working with someone who's trying to, become healthier or fitter or whatever it is, and you start spewing all your knowledge out, and they look at you like, I don't know what you're talking about, man. Like, dial it back a little bit. So it's a skill in itself too. It's just learning how to communicate all your information in a way that people will understand. And that's coaching science, right? Like, that's what
art.
Coaching is. It's an art, it's a science. It's, it's why we probably need a coaching class at Langara, because it needs to be understood and on how to do it. And, usually when you hear the word coach, you're thinking of, like the head basketball coach of X team or whatever it is. But I mean, as a personal trainer, you're a coach. As a physiotherapist, you're a coach. If you're working with someone one-on-one, it doesn't matter what your title is, you're coaching them, and you have to be able to communicate in order for them to succeed.
Yeah, agreed. And, again, it was during our masters where, the person that we revere, Dave Smith, or Doc, as he's commonly known, would tell us that when you get to my level and you're working with athletes and coaches, the majority of your time is learning how to communicate. It's not about this anymore. It's about your ability to communicate.
Yeah.
And that's just amplified when you're an instructor, because you have 30 kids in front of you and they're all different.
Yeah.
You're trying to get the same message across. Everybody's different. Our job is to get that across. Yeah. So, I've enjoyed that. I think I've spent now more time probably working with females, and whether it be team sport individuals. And I think that's been really good. It pushed me to learn different areas. I grew up with brothers. I didn't have any sisters, so I was able to grow in that area. And then finally, I worked my way to Vancouver, because my wife got a job at Fortia Sport Health out in Burnaby, so out your way.
Yep.
She was a physiologist when that sport institute first opened their doors. I was tagging along, and I really didn't know what to do, but I felt like for me to get to the position I wanted in the future, I needed to learn research, and I needed to continue to learn. So I thought doing a PhD would be great, but I had to make sure the PhD was right, and I was able to make it an applied experience. I didn't want to just be in a lab all the time, especially just pipetting.
Right.
So I was so lucky, and it's all about timing. I'm noticing that as I get older, that Field Hockey Canada hired a new coach, and I was able to, they were interested in getting a PhD student to work full time with them. And then it kind of matched the research with, the practitioner role. So Darren Warburg now at UBC, and Jack Totten is a legend to creating sport medicine, sport science in Vancouver. Jack kind of created a relationship with Field Hockey Canada, and Darren was able to supervise me, and I was able to work on a daily basis with the women's national team during the Rio cycle, 2016. So I was collecting data such as, they're wearing heart rate monitors, GPS. I was looking at how to quantify that exercise stress they're experiencing on field. And then I was able to, as my job, examine the response to that. So I was able to do my research on a daily basis, and I really enjoyed that. And I was able to, again, learn to communicate what I was seeing, because I would have this laptop out in the middle of the field, and the girls are seeing the heart rate in real time. They're asking me, "Is that good? Is that bad?" You know what athletes ask.
No, yeah.
And you have to kind of give them an answer that doesn't obviously tell them the yes or no, but more so you're on the right path, to be able to communicate that in real time. And then you're able to make evidence-based decisions in real time. So technology has come such a long way, but I think my experience during my PhD taught me how to become really good at simple things like a heart rate monitor, and how to actually tell somebody like a coach who needs that information to make a decision right away. I know what to actually look at, how to look at that, because it's not my job. And I think that's something too that I like to tell our students now, Brent, because a lot of them want to become physiotherapists, as an example.
That's the
And
number one
yeah,
goal,
and
career goal that we see, isn't it?
and they want to, a lot of them want to work in the sports setting. And I think it's important, and some of our instructors have experience in the sports setting, is to tell our students that we are practitioners. We don't make the decisions. It's our job just to relay the information.
Yeah.
You have to know where you fit, in the cogs.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be a good thing, that could be a frustrating thing, and you just have to learn that. So that, I enjoy that. The pressure is kind of off you, depending on who you work with, but that was a great experience. And I was able to do some pretty cool research. So probably what we'll talk about later, Rio is going to be hot potentially, but I was looking at a way to heat acclimate the girls, and I looked at hot yoga to see if hot yoga, so doing kind of a mild version of hot yoga involved of static stretching and movement in the temperature, probably 30, 35 degrees, would allow the girls over 7 days to acclimate and improve their physiology so that they could work harder essentially on the field, whether it's cold or hot. We didn't obviously qualify, but I was able to run the experiment, and we found some cool stuff.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that one up, because I mean, one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on my first podcast here was because of your research background, and being more of a practical, hands-on type coach that I am. It's nice to be able to have a perspective of actual researcher about how to take research information and apply it into sports performance. And that one research topic that you just mentioned is the one I was hoping to talk a little bit about, because I think it was a really interesting research paper, and it also did hit mainstream a little bit too. You got a little bit of mainstream media from that research, and I think it was mainly because of it involved the yoga into it, and hot yoga is a pretty big topic, and a big if you look at a lot of the yoga gyms around my area, Oxygen Yoga, they all have the hot yoga, and that's their their bread and butter, if you will. So I want to talk to you about a little about that, and get your sense on how this heat stress technique in hot yoga actually helped athletes, and where do you think it could lead in the application in future endeavors, or even just for athletes that are interested, that are listening to this, and how they can improve by using it.
Have you ever done hot yoga before?
Yes, I have done hot yoga before, and the only thing I remember from hot yoga was I started off in shorts and a t-shirt, and I ended in my Lycra spandex shorts, and that was it. And I had a pool of sweat right by me. It's intense, and I know, like, my wife Chantel does oxygen yoga every once in a while, and it's a little bit more intense than what I did that time, and she says it's pretty hard work.
Is it Bikram oxygen? I'm not familiar
no,
with that.
it's oxygen yoga. It's just it's a company that does yoga, and some of their classes they do with like the Bikram yoga heat is
Okay.
up, and you do exercise in this heated environment. So
40 degrees, yeah. I knew nothing about hot yoga. I had this is the story. I had a friend, and we're both in our PhD at the same time, and I was really stressed out, and she said, "Come on, do a yoga class." There is a hot box yoga studio, it's called. It's on UBC campus. So I was like, screw it, let's do it. It's not going to affect my resistance training, so I thought, because I was sore after that. But I did it, and I quickly realized, like, wow, this is a massive room that is heated, and which could act like a heat acclimation chamber, right? And that's the biggest problem when you work with a bunch of people who want to get used to exercising in the heat. Say they want to go and do the sun run, right? It might be a hot day. You have to be prepared for that. Where could you do that? 30 people at once, and the hot yoga studios to accommodate that. So I thought that's pretty cool. That is making something available to me that was very difficult to find. But then I did a couple sessions. I tried different levels. I'm not sure if Chantel does a certain level. Is there different levels at Oxygen?
Yeah, I think they have different levels at Oxygen. They have, different classes, different levels.
Right.
Because I know some of them are like aerobic styles classes, and I don't think they crank it up to 40 degrees for those, but there's definitely different levels. But I know Bikram yoga, that's what I did. And it was 40 degrees, and it was hot.
Yeah. So I tried different levels, and the most extreme made me sore. And the bottom one, I forget the names now at the time. There's 5 of them. The basic one was just pretty much static stretching. So it's almost like a recovery, if you want to think of it that way, right? Stretching in a hot environment. I didn't sweat too much. So I said to myself, well, with what we know, exercising in the heat, you have to have a minimal level of exercise stress that is accompanied by the heat to get adaptations where your body changes. Some of these adaptations are you sweat earlier, you don't sweat as much sodium. So if you ever look at your hat after a run, you don't feel the salt there, you sweat more water, but it's diluted. Having more sodium prevents cramping, holds on more water. So I thought, let's find something in the middle where if the 60-minute class, 30 minutes of it would be dynamic movement, and the other 30 is kind of mixed with static stretching. That way, when we talk about an athlete, it won't make them sore. So the next day they go training, it won't take away from the training.
Right.
So that was my perspective on yoga, and I don't think it was really looked at the time for enhancing performance. It's always been looked at as a recovery, regeneration kind of technique. So what we did was we did it during the winter time. It was supposed to be around 35 degrees, and the humidity was around 30, and it was comfortable. That's another thing too I wanted to do. I didn't want to make it uncomfortable.
Right.
If the athlete doesn't want to enjoy something, they're not going to do it.
Yeah.
So it had to be comfortable, be it challenging and stimulating. And we did a week of it, and I would make them swallow these pills, these ingestible thermostats, where I would walk around and I would put a little computer to their stomach, and I would get their core temperature.
Okay.
The heart rate on them as well. So I'd see their in live, percent heart rate. And I was realizing, wow, it doesn't really stress the cardiovascular system to the degree of which we would call high intensity exercise, but the core temperature is increasing. Mm-hmm. So they liked it, they sweat, and it wasn't too stressful in the body. Then after a week, we would test the blood every day. I noticed that their blood volume was dropping. So the way I like to talk about blood is to think of a car. I'm Italian, so I think of a Ferrari right away. You have to. A nice Ferrari, that's the human body. Inside the car, you need gasoline. Gasoline makes the body move. If you want to think of the body as the car, blood is the gasoline. Mm-hmm. Now you have 2 options to improve the performance of the Ferrari. You either put in better petrol, so from regular to premium. That could be, say, increasing the amount of red blood cells you have, more oxygen carrying capacity, right? Or you put more in the tank, and you can go harder and farther. And if blood is composed of both water and the red blood cell, when you exercise in the heat, you increase more of the water component.
Right.
Now, the way that will help somebody perform better aerobically, so, if people are listening and they perform any aerobic exercise, so something that lasts longer than, say, 2 minutes, the way it works is the water component is called plasma. It doesn't carry oxygen that well, but what it does is it allows, because your system's like pipes in the body, it allows the body to push the fluid back to the heart. And essentially the heart fills up more every time it beats. So essentially you're recycling the red blood cells you do have over a minute to a greater extent, if you want to think of it that way. So it allows your heart to work more efficiently. And there's a lot that goes into heat acclimation, but that was purely the one that I was looking at, the cardiovascular side of things.
Yeah. So
our girls got dehydrated. They stopped exercising. All they did was they went from training every day to hot yoga, and they lost a decent amount of blood. But yet, when we did a test at the end, a maximal exercise test, the performance didn't really change. and some maximal performance improved, even in a dehydrated state. Typically, it's the opposite, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So something was telling me that I wasn't looking at everything and other changes were occurring that I wasn't accounting for.
Yeah.
Now, once we started exercising again, the girls had a national team camp. It was outside. It was 10 degrees, typical Vancouver in December. They started exercising again, and we kept on taking their blood. Once they began exercise, their blood volume jumped like 13%.
Wow.
Even without the heat anymore. So it told me that the body, something happened over those 7 days, that it was primed to get the adaptations that I thought was going to happen, but after.
Right.
So what I took away from this is, if you're looking to perform in an environment, whether it be hot or cold, and you want to use heat as a means to improve yourself from a cardiovascular perspective, you have to continue to do your regular exercise.
Right.
Exercise maintains blood volume. We know that.
Yeah.
I think what my study showed was, when you look at a high performance athlete, the level of intensity of hot yoga for them isn't obviously equal to the regular training. And because of that, they lose some of that blood that they've been holding on to.
Yeah.
But when you do go back to your regular exercise, something changes in the body where it's now primed to conserve water, hold on to your blood volume, and then get those benefits afterwards. So it's almost like peaking, where you go into competition ready, just not, until you get into competition.
Right. Okay. So do you think there's any, like I was thinking today, I was thinking about, football seasons coming up, and a lot of those football players will be going into their training camps, and those training camps tend to be in August in the dead heat. And a lot of them, are big, heavy guys, and they struggle in those hot environments. So would implementing this type of strategy at some point in their training, maybe leading up to their heat exposure, would it benefit them when they get into that training camp and they start working into the heat? Or is it just more of they'll get some adaptations from increasing plasma when they start training again?
I think if the athlete is coming in having done decent prep, more than likely their preseason is still going to be a pretty big stimulus, 2-a-days or whatnot, where the training volumes increase. So they'll get the cardiovascular adaptations quickly during that week. But implementing hot yoga maybe on a regular basis, really depending upon the individual, obviously, depending on the intensity of the yoga, I think there's really good potential for that to help them get into a hot environment, in this case a football player, and be maybe more prepared to deal with that from a mental standpoint too, of, wow, this really sucks, I'm hot.
Right.
From a physiological perspective as well, to regulate that temperature so they can perform and not kind of keel over. What's interesting though is something I found in the study, that obviously everybody's different, but body size is the key determinant in how somebody responds in hot or cold. A larger individual has more surface area. So when you're looking at exercising in compensable heat stress, meaning that, the heat that I'm receiving and generating, heat that I'm receiving from the sun outside and generating from metabolism, the surface area I have, and the more of it will allow evaporation to occur to cool me down enough. Now, once you start working above 35 degrees Celsius, the largest surface area, it's like a lineman, that actually works against them. Uncompensable heat stress, meaning that when you exercise in that environment, your temperature can never kind of stabilize. It's always going to go up. Because now, as in before, where you had extra surface area to cause evaporation, you have extra surface area to take in the heat from the ambient environment, along with your own metabolic heat, and it works against you. So I think what we're learning now, and there's great stuff coming out of Ottawa, is we have to tailor yoga, as an example, or any of the heat environments that we're stressing people, to the sex, female or male, and then also to the individual's characteristics, in this case, anthropometry.
Yeah.
So I think it has to be more tailored when you look at it from those two perspectives to kind of get the outcome that you want.
Yeah. I think that's what almost, if you look at everything, everything has to be tailored to the individual, regardless of what it is, right?
Yeah,
Everyone reacts differently to the stress that we impose on them. And so, yeah,
sure.
that would be an important part of it. Um, in terms of health implications, if someone who's just training to be healthier or becoming fitter, do you see any applications that we could, use to help people, use hot yoga in order to get fitter, or get healthier, or
Yeah.
just feeling better?
I think the amount of evidence out right now, the longitudinal research show that there was no dramatic or no significant difference between long-term yoga practitioners, not the heat, just yoga, and individuals who did other activities. When you look at the amount of stress being equal. When you look at hot yoga specifically, there's some good work coming out of Texas now, and they're starting to show that hot yoga may have added benefits compared to normal hatha yoga, where they're looking at improved arterial compliance. That's the fancy term for how your arteries respond to each blood pressure beat. And that's a sign of health, especially when it comes to hypertension.
Right.
So there's more and more evidence now as yoga is becoming something that's being researched, because it can be controlled. Like, research needs to be controlled, and you could put somebody in a room, control the temperatures, collect all the data you need, and that's going to lead to some high quality results.
Yeah.
So I think more and more evidence is demonstrating that there's really good potential for it. I just think you have to get the individual cleared to go in an environment where they're going to be 40 degrees and they're now bending upside down, and they could just pass out because,
right.
The blood pressure isn't going to be suitable to drive the blood back to the head when you stand up.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
okay.
I think that's important to take into consideration.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it was an interesting study, and you definitely got some very, very good results out of it. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see sort of where the heat stress training goes from here as well, because I think it's important to put into a training program. I remember years ago when I was with Basketball Canada, the junior women's national team were heading to Puerto Rico for the World Championships, and I remember hearing the coach talk about what the temperature is going to be like, but they're going to be in a gym, and he wasn't worried about the temperature or anything like that. And then when they got there, the gym, it had basically, they didn't have windows, it had holes. And so there was actually no temperature control in the gym. It was basically whatever the heat was outside, it was in the gym. And those girls, they did not do well in that tournament. And I think a big part of it was they weren't prepared for the heat. So I think training for the environment that you're going to be performing in is an important application for athletes. And it would be interesting, if you could apply something like, not so much hot yoga, but maybe that controlled environment in a hot yoga studio with some type of aerobic or anaerobic training that might benefit the athlete and allow the thermogenics of the body to kick in and start adapting to that stress.
Yeah. When I first started, there's an individual at UBC named Michael Cole, and I was looking at, my original idea was to combine high altitude with heat. Being in Vancouver, it's difficult to find places for high altitude. But he was telling me, Andrew, I think you should really look at the heat, because the heat seems to lead to greater performance adaptation. And, throughout my journey, and now, in my opinion, in an event that lasts longer than 4 minutes, and it could be like your fighter, 4 minutes, 4 minutes, 4 minutes, but an event that is equal to or greater than 4 minutes, I think that proper heat acclimation is probably going to lead to equal, if not better, aerobic and cardiovascular adaptations for that individual.
Right.
I mean, there's really good evidence to show that these could be elicited within 7 to 10 days.
Hmm.
That's typically where the cardiovascular adaptations occur. 14 days is more sweating and pseudomotor, they call it, responses, but you could really get some massive adaptations early on that will allow somebody to perform at a higher level and sustain higher level for a good period of time. So it doesn't matter where you live. You could always make your own chamber, shut the door, turn the faucet on.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be humid. It might not be fun, but you could create your own heat chamber.
Right. Yeah.
So you could use these and create these rooms anywhere you really wish.
Yeah.
That with the girls, man alive, I tell you, it is such an unexplored area, and it drives me nuts. And I think now more and more research boards, NSERC, CIHR, they're really making you justify why you don't have, when you do research, both sexes. Because we've been applying all these techniques based on male participants to females, and just now starting to realize it's not always the same. And
Right.
this is big for heat acclimation. And a female's core temperature could be up to 1 degree difference between menstrual cycle phases. And that's big. I mean, if you're outside rowing or exercising for 36 minutes or more, that's a massive disadvantage potentially that you have to overcome.
Right.
So I think, again, focusing on the sex and making sure that you're adapting these things like heat to make sure you're going to get the response you want, knowing when you're doing it is important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. And I think also having a good solid aerobic base also will help with the heat dissipation as well.
Yeah.
So if you have, if you've trained, you've done the training, you've put the work in, you've built your aerobic base, then when you get into heat, your body will adapt better to it, on the spot too, right? Like it will keep your body cool as long as it possibly can. And if the longer the aerobic base, the longer you'll be able to cool your body. So
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the adaptations of heat, some people don't know this, but the adaptations of heat are very similar to the adaptations of beginning an exercise program. Right? There's a limitation, so the ceiling at which training can lead to these is going to be obviously limited. So where you have to go and look at alternatives like heat, but just exercising on a regular basis, greater amounts of intensity could give you these adaptations, much like heat.
mm-hmm. Yeah.
And what's really amazing is, like, you and I always talk about in classes, the FIT principle, right? Frequency, intensity, times type. Intensity is one of the leading variables that is responsible for change.
Mm-hmm.
Let's think about this. If you do 7 days of heat training, that means the next 7 days you'll be able to work harder and longer, which means your intensity level could be increased.
Yeah.
And like you said, if you periodize this throughout the year, that means compared to another individual who's not, you will be able to work out harder and longer throughout the year. And at the end of the year, theoretically, you should be at a higher level.
Yeah.
So being smart is obviously key
mm-hmm.
to implementing this throughout the season.
Yeah, absolutely. That's actually a good segue into the next topic that I wanted to bring up with you, and mentioning periodization and long-term training. One thing we need to be able to do is monitor the body's response to that training to make sure that we don't overreach or overtrain at certain parts of the year. And another big part of your research that you do is you look at heart rate variability. And I know one of the research papers that you've published talked about the validity of essentially app-based heart rate variability. And I believe it was the Elite heart rate variability app that your research looked at. And that's what I would like to talk about now, because I personally use heart rate variability regularly. I try to get my athletes to use it when people are, I'm consulting people about health changes and improving their health. I suggest for them to use it because I think it just gives you so much information on what your body is going through and if it's too stressed or if it's recovered. And I think it's just something that, if you can get the person to buy into it, which is a hard part in itself, because it means recording your heart rate for 10 minutes every day. And a lot of people, they don't want to put that work in, but if they do, there's a lot of benefits to it. So maybe you can talk a little bit about, your heart rate variability research and what it is, because you can do a far better job talking about it and what it is than I can.
I'll do my best. If you think about just doing any type of physical activity, we call that the dose of physical activity. As a practitioner, when you're working with somebody, you then have to understand the response to that dose. One way to look at that response is to look at the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system's response in that individual. And you could do that by looking at the frequency of heartbeats. So by definition, heart rate variability is looking at the variability in time, specifically milliseconds, between each beat. And the more variability you have, the more it signifies that you're under control to the parasympathetic nervous system. Parasympathetic is that calm, relaxed homeostasis, a word I'm sure much of us have heard before. Now, when there's less variability between each beat, so you're almost like a robot now, Terminator, where it's just kind of consistent, it's more indicative of sympathetic drive. That's the fight or flight. Like you're anxious, you're stressed. You may not feel like you're going to fight, but it's that stress, emotional, psychological, all that combined. So after exercise, if we look at the recording between each heartbeat, and nowadays that's easier to do by getting somebody to put their finger on their phone. Plethysmography, Samsung does that, or putting a chest strap around them. It could collect the data, it could be exported via Bluetooth to a phone, and then you get the data in real time. And you can send it to you, the coach, and the athlete can look at it as well and say, hey, maybe I should back off today, right? Mm-hmm. Or maybe it's a good day to go and train hard because based off this data, it says I'm recovered, I'm parasympathetic, I'm rested. Or maybe Brent had me doing 5 sets of 15 reps, but it's telling me I'm stressed out. Maybe I need to bump it down to 3 sets today because I'm not fully recovered. Essentially, that's the advantage of looking at heart rate variability. It's a quick snapshot in time of, overall how your body is reacting into that dose, that exercise.
Yeah.
So it is quite advantageous, and now it's easy to do with these smartphone apps because you could buy like a pulse oximeter, put on your finger, or like I said, a chest strap, and they're even validating now people are only doing 60 seconds worth. You don't need to have 10 minutes anymore.
Wow, that's
good. Yeah, it is, because there's an entire paper, or there's a paper out there that had an entire discussion and movement around it called athlete compliance. If the athlete's not going to lie there in bed for 10 minutes, and remember this, you can't get up to go pee. Yeah. Your cat can't jump on you because then your fight or flight's going to go up. Yeah. The kid can't be screaming at you, I'm hungry. You got to get that thing on and get off and go make the coffee and make your kid your meals for the day.
Exactly.
So it is a little bit more feasible now because of the time constraints and the technology. And there's a lot of evidence behind it from a health perspective that the more parasympathetic you are, the more variability between each beat, the healthier you are. The less risk of all things mortality and morbidity, actually. Mm-hmm. And the more stressed you are, so the more sympathetic you are, fight or flight, your risk for developing cardiovascular disease increases.
Right.
So it's quite fascinating. And I had the privilege to work with, we live in BC, so we see the wildland firefighters all the time, doing some research now, and these individuals are chronically stressed. And you're recording their stress over years of work, and they're showing that they're developing these cardiovascular disease early on in life, and some of them are dying really early because they're constantly stressed. Heart rate variability is one thing we're trying to implement in their workforce now to say, hey, we can measure this. Maybe you need to actually look at it so you could change other things so you're not always stressed.
Yeah, and that's where I think it could be just a tremendous health benefit, to use heart rate variability to help people. So, they know that, okay, your body has been stressed for 7 straight days. Why is that? You need to figure that out. you know, and what's like the main thing that's being produced when you're stressed is what, like what hormone is running through your body when you're stressed? It's cortisol, right? So
Yeah.
if you're stressing your body to the point where you have this massive amount of cortisol running through your body, heart rate variability tells you that. And then that way you can back off or figure something else. And um, like for the people who I've consulted with, who I've told to use it for health benefits, I mean, I've told them to use heart rate variability to help determine if their diet is working. Um, you know, if the supplements that they're taking are working. Um, you know, I regularly check my heart rate variability, and you know, I was on doing gluten free one time and noticed my heart rate variability was all out of whack when I was on gluten free. I don't know why that is, but it it you know, it was stressing my body, and whether it was just because it was a calorie restriction thing, or it had something to do with the training that I was doing at the time or what. But you know, if when you look at, you know, your health journey, and one thing I try to teach our students, when it comes to their health journey and eventually being the leaders of other people's health journeys, is, you know, in order to figure out what works for you, and that's the big thing, like you even said, like in your research, you know, you need to sometimes dose based on the individual. Everyone's different, everyone responds different. What I do isn't going to work for you. What you do isn't going to work for me all the time. And so we're on this constant health journey, and we're on this constant real, you know, research of ourself. And things like heart rate variability can help actually, you know, put metrics into our own health research, and it can tell us exactly what's happening when I do this type of training, or when I take this type of medication, or when I get this much sleep. So, you know, it's like I said, it's hard to get the buy-in, but when people buy in, I think it's totally worth it, because you can learn so much about your body just by measuring your heart rate variability every day.
Yeah, agreed. It's a pretty fancy tool that can be quite informative. It is tricky because the body as a whole is complex. We always don't know why HRV changes. It's hard to pinpoint that because there's so many things that we don't control for in our lives, obviously. But it does, to me, it doesn't matter. Sometimes it just does not matter. If you take enough days, and this is I think the important aspect people need to remember is you need to develop baseline data. Like these one-offs aren't good enough. So you have to listen. You have to do it over time to see what normal is, because every day is going to be different. 8 hours sleep is not always going to be the same. Develop a fingerprint of who you are, like you said, then to see if I introduce a supplement or if I remove gluten, as you said, what happens based off my normative data.
Yeah.
And that's where it could get quite interesting. And people also need to understand too, is if they get an app and they get the score in the morning and it says, you know, this is a poor score, they shouldn't be too concerned about that until they understand who they are.
Yeah.
I've seen athletes, and maybe these values won't mean anything, but I've seen athletes with an RMSSD score of 300. And then I've seen athletes who have a score, but which is highly parasympathetic, very high, which would be associated with relaxation. Others who run 20, which you almost be like squashed, right? And what we've seen, especially over the last 70 years, is that it's a U-shaped curve. And I always like to describe it as zombies. You have your World War Z zombie, which is a very low HRV score. They're tired all the time. They're very high strung driven. They're moving around. They can't sleep, but they're tired. Then you have the Walking Dead zombie, where they're so parasympathetic, so relaxed that they're tired all the time.
Right.
They're kind of lethargic.
Yeah.
So everybody's gonna be different, and everybody has their own sweet spot.
Yeah.
It's up for us to figure out how to get them there.
Yeah. And that's one reason why I like the heart rate variability elite app, because that's the one I use with my Polar H10 heart rate monitor. And it has both sides. Like it has you're overly parasympathetic or you're overly sympathetic, and then it sort of builds what the sweet spot would be. So it does take that into consideration, because you can be too much into one side, even the relaxation side. Like, you can be at a point where your body is too relaxed. It's it
Yeah,
and
it's not
that
primed.
yeah, it's not primed. And when you go into performance and your body's not primed because you're overly parasympathetic, that's going to hurt your performance. That's going to hurt your training for that day, right?
Yeah,
So
we've seen that actually, where you can't get excited to the level, that pre-anticipation right before the gun goes off, for your athletes, the cage, right
yeah,
before you put it on. If you can't get excited enough to get like, oh my God, it's about to get going, the goosebumps, and getting into that zone,
yeah,
it could potentially work against you.
yeah,
And that's what we're starting to realize is, even take this. This is pretty cool. Like, you could have a value of, say, just 200, and I'm just using values here, but 200 could be really good for somebody. But they could score 200 where you would think that they're ready, but they could also score 200 when they're extremely overtrained or non-functionally overreached, because there's a continuum. And again, now that 200 HRV score, just that random HRV score, is now being looked at in relation to their resting heart rate.
right.
I think, and not to go, of course, too much, but heart rate variability is modulation, meaning change in the autonomic nervous system. It's not the drive, parasympathetic or vagal drive. That's heartbeat. That's the natural beat, right? The time or the average over that minute. So we're now looking at HRV in relation to vagal tone, because that could even be more informative. And I think Elite HRV actually does that. As one example. To be even more formative, because you could get the same HRV score when you're completely rested, ready to go, than when you're non-functionally overtrained.
Yeah.
You would know better if you just looked solely at the HRV score. It's gotten quite complicated, especially when I started my my PhD in 2013. I started it, and literally within 3 years, like, oh my God, massive breakthroughs are being developed right here. And people started realizing, well, HRV was taboo for a long time because we were just purely looking at a score. We didn't know how to interpret the score.
Right.
And now with these apps that are using research, we're actually able to make sense of these values in relation to other things like resting heart rate and whatnot. And it's much more informative. Or the day-to-day variation. That's another thing. Somebody who has high day-to-day variation, it's like pushing them under the pool one day and then they pop up the next. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
But if you have a suppressed score for multiple days, you haven't resurfaced, you haven't taken that breath yet, you're not ready for another high dose of high intensity training.
Yeah.
So there's so many perspectives now that we can look at HRV, and it's really dependent upon what you want to do with
it. Right. I think, would you agree with this, is if we are, because when you look at overtraining, there's a psychological part of it. There's a physiological part of it. When you overtrain, the physiology is, your resting heart rate spikes, you go through potential insomnia. And then the psychological part is just, the staleness, the burnout, the part, you're not as driven. So if you are on the parasympathetic side, I think that would be, you'd be more into the psychological overtraining, even though there's a physiological aspect of it, but it's taken you to a side where, you can't get the drive, like you said, where the sympathetic is going to be more of the physiology, right? You're going to be more in the fight or flight, more, you're going to have a harder time going to sleep. Your training's going to suffer because your heart rate's all out of whack. So it's almost like the psychological side could be in the parasympathetic more, and the sympathetic side more in the physiology.
Yeah, I really don't know. I think it would have to be dependent upon the individual. I think there's maybe some commonality between both. I really wouldn't know. If, as a parent, you and I are both parents of two boys, constantly telling them, put on your shoes. When I read your piece today, put on your shoes, put on your shoes. That
Yeah.
becomes white noise after a while, doesn't it? Right?
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
It's the same with your heart and your nervous system. When you're constantly stressed, the receptors on your heart to receive the stress signals become dull to it.
Yeah.
They could become very dull to it because you're just constantly in overdrive. So what happens is your body will actually signal through HRV that you have high HRV just because your body is so desensitized to the stress.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that would mean now you're psychologically altered in one fashion or another. But I do know that, I'm not sure how many people are actually overtrained in their life.
Right.
During my master's, when I was talking to Dave Smith, and he was working with Olympians, so these guys, high performance athletes, he said, I haven't come across many people who are overtrained. There's a continuum, right? Overreach, non-functional overreach, staleness, whatever else you want to continue leading up to overtrain. So I think maybe the psychological aspects could change per check marks in that continuum,
Right.
and probably depending upon the individual as well. I'm not sure what it'd be like with the HRV though.
Mm-hmm.
I think though that the benefit here is if you improve your HRV, if you think of the old school like Street Fighter games, where you have that kind of bar at the bottom. Remember when you punch somebody really fast and the bar would shrink? Then you have to wait for that bar to increase.
Yeah.
HRV is a signal that your juice that you have, that bar has now increased. Where you're able to apply more punches and you essentially have a greater battery in you. You've gone from like a AAA to a single A battery.
Okay.
And you're able to do more training now because you have a bigger battery before you get squashed and you have changes in your mood stuff.
Okay.
And that's just through planned, structured training where you're able to adapt, recover. So maybe you don't get those alterations as frequently. To answer your question, I don't know what the psychological adaptations would be.
So essentially the HRV then is telling us, what our battery level's at.
Yeah. I like to look at it purely as battery.
Yeah, that's a great analogy because it puts it, it just puts the whole energy part of it into it, right? Like, so you fully charged, you're good to go for a long time. You check your HRV and your battery's low. How do you recharge your battery? What do you think the single most important thing is to charge your battery?
If I had to guess, I think sleep. I think sleep is a big component, and your battery is affected by so many things. I mean, you're something that we're realizing that people who are really overtrained is usually due to emotional stress and outside of the exercise. It's not due to the exercise typically. Okay. It's the additive stress,
right?
Relationship stress, work stress that it accompanies the exercise stress,
right?
So I think naturally that would be meaning that you're probably not sleeping as much. Just speculating here.
Yeah.
You're not getting the frequency, the duration of sleep, and you probably accumulate sleep debt. I think there's good research to show that sleep plays a big important factor in the recovery when we look at HRV. And we're just talking about HRV. We're not even talking about how we feel. But I think sleep is probably a big one.
Yeah, that's what that's where I was at with it too. I'd say sleep would be how you recharge that battery. It's amazing how much we're starting to realize the importance of sleep. There was a time when if you slept lots, you were thought as lazy and weak. But now I almost feel like if you are able to sleep 7 to 9 hours a night, you should be celebrated because you're doing what the human body needs to do, right? And that's how we get that recharge. But I mean, so many times we just deprive our body from it, and it's like, and you and I know one reason why we deprive our body from it because it's
not by
we have two people that control that sleep at times, but there's so many people who can sleep, and another topic I wanted to talk to you about, maybe we'll make it our last topic, is the health of our students. In my 13 years at Langara, I've noticed the health of the kinesiology students have declined considerably. When I first started, I do the beep test in our health class, beginning of every semester. Always did it for second class. Everyone hates me because in the second class they know they're doing the beep test. And when I first started, my first 3-4 years, the average would be like 7.5 on the beep test. And then in 2014, it was just like bang, 5 was the average. And I started to get to the point where I barely saw, students getting up to 12 and 13, which was, you'd have like 6 or 7. And now, like the last time I did the beep test in the health class, it was worse. And it's weird because you think these are kinesiology students, they are into sports, they're into physical activity, and their health is, to me, it's a concern. I mean, it's not all of them. There are definitely some that are still very healthy, but there are some that they don't move like they used to. They don't have the aerobic capacity like they used to. And I wonder, like, what is it? Is it because of technology? Is it because of lack of sleep? Is it because of motivation? Like, what's happening? Why are we seeing this decline in health in our youth?
Yeah, I think whoever finds that answer is going to be not only rich, but a very sought after individual. I had a long time that I spent in school, and it becomes very difficult to find time to exercise when you're a student.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a bit of a strange situation when we talk about, as instructors, we preach about, hey, it's important to get out there, it's important to move all day, and yet we're lecturing to students who sit down for 8 hours, who are by definition sedentary.
Yeah.
But I think the onus always comes down to the individual. I think kin students have a tremendous advantage in knowing the benefits of frequent exercise throughout the day, taking the stairs rather than the elevator. That's something that I've seen, just a little thing like that. I think we've become lazy, just generally as a society. If I have to be say a blanket statement, where we want to take the elevator, we want to park as close as possible to the front door.
Yeah.
People will drive in circles for 10 minutes to find that one parking spot, right?
Exactly.
And then they'll probably get their car dinged because they're all so parked close together.
Yeah.
I think we're just, I think schools also become so competitive where they're all competing against each other to get to the next stage, especially where we are at Langara, because they're trying to go to the next step. I got to get into UBC. I got to get into SFU. I can't afford to take 40 minutes and to train, to exercise. That we're seeing, the changes and the scores. And it's probably not going to be another 10, 15 years until they're older and they realize, I've had maybe high blood pressure, or don't feel so great, don't look the way I want to, and they start to make a change, unfortunately.
Yeah. I know in that first year health class that we teach, I mean, that's one thing I really harp on them is just like the, active lifestyle, just healthy lifestyles, just move when you can, right? Like take the stairs, park further away. Just do something that's going to make you move a little bit more. I mean, I've debated because, recently, I've been up lecturing, and, my lectures can be 2 hours, and usually we take a break after 50 minutes, and I'm moving back and forth, and they're just sitting there. and it's just sitting and sitting and sitting and sitting. And I'm like, God, I feel bad. Like I'm making these kids sit here and listen to my boring stories. And
Yeah.
it's hurting their movement. I've debated getting rid of desks and chairs and bringing in yoga mats and being like, let's sit on the floor, because when you sit on the floor, I guarantee you're going to move to change your position at least 100 times just to feel better. And then at least maybe they'll be getting a little bit of mobility work, during lecture.
Yeah.
It'd be a bit of an interesting experiment to see what would happen if these students walk into the classroom and there's no desks and chairs, just yoga mats, and what
Well,
the reaction would be.
we have a room on the fifth floor in T building at Langara College. If we made it mandatory that everybody had to walk, barring circumstances where they obviously couldn't,
Yeah.
just doing that, walking up and walking down, whether they had
Mhm.
class 2 times a week, would be an improvement. Because that walk could be, for some of them a minute, for some of them a minute and a half. Who knows?
Yeah.
What I find astonishing is I will put up a slide of the United States of America, and I will show each state, because this we have the data, 2017, each state and the population who are obese and overweight. So we're talking 80% plus who are overweight.
Hmm.
And when they look at that, and you think of how many people in the States, and we're telling them, listen, obesity is an epidemic.
Yeah.
Obesity leads to diabetes, it leads to this, it leads to that, just by being obese. I would think, my God, like, how does this not register and say, I just got this golden nugget? Like, I need to make sure that I'm physically active and make sure that I'm consuming appropriate nutrition,
Yeah.
whatever that may be for you, so that I don't get in this position. Because 80% of Texas, 80% of Florida, even in Canada, that's a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a
I know.
lot of people. And
I
people
know.
don't change. Like, the projections are only going to go up. So, like, we need practitioners, but when you see data like that, it kind of, I just don't know how to get the message across better sometimes and say, look,
Yeah,
look
I
at
know. I know.
this slide.
Well, I mean, it's you see that in the States, and then I know, like, for most of the, like, when I show those stats, most of my students, their initial response is, well, that's America. We're in Canada. But I mean, right now in British Columbia alone, 35% of BC population is either diabetic or pre-diabetic, and it's
Yeah,
predicted to go up to 39 to 40% in the next 5 years if it continues the way it is. That's a lot of people.
a
It's a
lot of
lot
people.
of people. And diabetes, I mean, obviously type 1 diabetes is more of an autoimmune, but type 2 diabetes, for the most part, that is a lifestyle
Yeah,
disease. That is a disease where your choices have created a sugar level or a glucose level in your body that's higher than it should be. And that just wreaks havoc on everything. And
I
that's
know.
35%.
There's a great study that came out that just looked at weight loss alone, and they showed that the more people lost weight, the greater percentage of individuals who were able to come off drugs like metformin
Mm-hmm.
and who weren't even taking insulin and were not even clinically diagnosed or categorized as diabetic anymore. I
Yeah.
think it was greater than 15 kilos, 80% were not on medication. The majority of them were not diabetic anymore just by losing weight.
Yeah.
And, it's 5 reps to put down the donut sometimes. But, I would have these conversations, and I'm sure the psych classes probably take them to a much greater level, but I would have the conversation with the students that say, have we been beating around the bush too much? It's a tough conversation to say to somebody, listen, your weight is much higher than it needs to be. The lifestyle decisions that you're making are extremely poor on a regular basis. Like, I don't want to be the one to tell them that. And as Canadians, we're quite polite. And I think we're at a point now where we've identified this as an epidemic, but yet we're not doing enough. We need to have the hard conversations.
Absolutely. We need to make
And
it. We need to make it. We have to. We have to do something. It has to be a change. And our students are the ones that are going to be the future leaders. And,
That's right.
they
That's right.
need to, they're the ones who need to look at themselves first, because if you're not healthy, how are you going to help someone become healthy? And like I said, I'm not saying it's not all the students, but I mean, for most part, I mean, I don't really see our students having like an overweight problem. It's just more of a movement and cardiovascular problem that I see, right? So there's obviously a piece there that's missing. Um, and it stems from not understanding, right? And we need to help people understand, and we need to tell people what the things that they don't want to hear, you
Mm-hmm.
know and it's just this acceptance of negative behavior that our society has. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, that person smokes, it's just who he is, he's just like, he's too old to change now. We just have this acceptance of negative behavior, and we have to try and you know not have that acceptance to negative behavior. We have to actually go out
Yeah.
and say, like, no, this isn't good enough. We need to help, and we need to make change. And that's one thing that I really stress with that first year student, you know. And one of the greatest feelings I get is when I run into a student and, they're out at the Langara golf course and they're running, and they're like, oh, your class, your active health class I took, it changed my life. I'm out here running all the time. I'm more active. I'm eating better. I've lost weight. And to me, that's like, okay, like my message got to somebody. Now, hopefully they can do the same. And then we can get this domino effect of better health.
Yeah, agreed. I mean, there's some great researchers at McMaster, and I think Stu Phillips that came out with a statement that you could outwork a bad diet. And Stu is the king for looking at protein consumption for muscle, and it's very difficult to outwork a bad diet because that means you're constantly exercising, you're constantly
Yeah.
moving.
Yeah.
I think in my journey now, I'm realizing that I don't want to say exercise has been oversold, but I think more concentration and emphasis on nutrition. I think that is probably the bigger bang for the buck. Not eating as much and learning how to say no to food and the amount of foods, I think will probably be a bigger first step than exercising more.
Yeah, I agree. I think it comes down to really having a conversation with yourself on where
Yeah,
you are with food, what's your relationship with food, and really understand. Because I think, you know, like, if you look at, I mean, there's two real parts to it. There's exercise and there's movement, right? And you think about it, movement is a much greater piece than exercise. If you move enough through the day and you eat properly, you eat real food, you eat the right amount, um, and you sleep enough, you probably don't even need to exercise if you're just looking for basic health benefits,
yeah,
right? Like, if you just are moving, you're not sitting for 8 hours a day, because a lot of people don't understand, if they sit for 8 hours a day, but they exercise for 60 minutes, well, they're still living a sedentary lifestyle. Just
yeah,
because you exercise for an hour a day, if you're sitting for 8 hours a day, you know, that doesn't make you active. It doesn't make you move enough. It just means you exercise, and that 60-minute is probably not offsetting the 8 hours. And then you have to look at what you did in that 8 hours too, right? Like, how much food did you eat during that 8 hours of sitting? So that is the type of stuff we need to make sure that we teach to our students, and in high school and in college, and then hopefully they can start teaching others.
I agree. And I think it's just it's highlighting the control of things such as business. I mean, you look at cigarettes and they have labels on packages now that show decrepit lungs, right? Just ash. But yet on a bag of chips or a bag of Kit Kats, there's nothing on that.
Yeah.
right? It'll say zero trans fats, but okay, that's great. It doesn't show, the diabetes, what a diabetic foot could look like as an example.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
and that's just control over, or what does it come down to? Like money. So it's tough for
Yeah.
us to get the message across in school. Then it'd be
Yeah.
tougher for our students to go out. Yet, we what's the halftime sponsor for the NFL, like Tostitos or something
Yeah,
like that, right?
exactly.
Like,
Yeah. Yeah,
how do you?
we live in a culture of food and culture of, fast food and
Yeah,
fake food, and it's unfortunate, but yeah, like you said, it's all about the money, and it's all about,
it's
you know,
tough.
making
Tough.
making as much as you can.
But that's why I love it when either our kids will learn it with us or they go on like biochemistry. What happens when you have 1 gram of protein? What does 1 gram of protein equal calorie wise, right?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know about for you, but when I learned that, from the day I learned that, I have never ever eaten a meal or looked at anything without numbers going through my head again. And
Yeah.
that could either be a curse or a blessing,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
obviously it could be taken to the extremes, but
Yeah.
that's what this goes through my head now, because like it's like the Matrix. Once you've taken the red pill or whether it was a blue pill, like you
Yeah.
can't go back.
Yeah.
So I don't know if we need to do a better job at getting that point across in school and making them actually do assignments where they actually calculate it and grain it
Mhm.
so that when they do leave, okay, this is what I'm being said, this is what I'm being
Yeah.
said, or this
One
is this
thing
much.
one thing I'm gonna start. I've talked a little bit about it, and I'm gonna start talking more about it. Um, is I'm gonna bring a little bit more of about fasting into into our classes, because I think, when most people hear the word fasting, they get a little bit freaked out, and they think it's about, not eating for 2 days or something like that. But I think fasting can be a real powerful aspect of food because it helps you take control over food versus, food controlling you. And what we need to understand about fasting is it doesn't need to be this 24, 48-hour thing. It's really about creating a window of time where you can eat and a window of time where you don't eat, you know? Like for me personally, I basically, my last meal is, we eat at 5:30, so I'm usually done at 6, and then I don't eat again, unless in, occasion where I have like a drink or, something. I usually don't eat again until 8 the next morning. So there's a 14-hour period where I don't eat, and then a 10-hour period where I do eat. So it's, technically that's fasting, but it's really just sort of controlling the times when you can consume your calories. And I found since I've done that, I've eaten less because I've knocked off 3-4 hours in the day where I usually were eating. And right there, you can cut out 400 or 500 calories a day just by, I don't want to use the word restricting because people get a little sensitive when they hear that, because you're not really restricting yourself. You're just giving yourself the period of time where you can eat the food that you need to eat. So I think I'm going to start incorporating a little bit of that into our courses now, and help educate people a bit more on that.
Yeah, I think anything that allows somebody to do that, control their calories in the day that they're consuming in a healthy manner, is obviously beneficial. How you do it, I don't know, doesn't really matter as long as
Yeah.
it's healthy and productive. So if fasting will help somebody, whether it be intermittent, whatever it may be, just reduce the overall amount of calories they're having in the day,
Mm.
then that's great. It'll
Yeah.
work for them.
Yeah.
And some people need that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think there's a room, for using that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, that was a great conversation, Andrew.
That was
Appreciate
good.
that.
Time flew by right there.
Yeah, time did fly by. Well, I appreciate your time and your insight on, the heat stress and heart rate variability and a little bit of health. Definitely have a lot more that I want to talk to you about, so we'll have to have another podcast together at some point. But
I love it.
I appreciate you taking the time and having a chat with me today.
Thanks for having me on. It was good to touch on certain topics and to talk about everything. And it's always good. I love getting your text messages. I love going back and forth. And I'll just say this: when you talked about in the beginning bouncing stories off each other for kids, it's been really helpful for me coming into Langara 2017 to connect with you for two boys, because I think my second wasn't even born yet, and you had your two kids, right?
Yeah.
And it was really, really helpful mentally for me to talk to you and have an outlet. My God, like I had nobody, and you've been a massive help. So thank you for everything and always being there to listen. And
Well,
I love that your boys are older.
Yeah.
I can get the feedback from you. You go through it first.
Yeah, exactly. I can help you prepare for what's next. And
Exactly.
yeah,
So it's been great.
Yeah, part of healthy lifestyle and being a healthy person is having a community around you, and it's nice having you part of my community, and I appreciate the insightfulness that you bring into our friendship.
Yeah, it's been great, man. It's good to talk, and let's set up again.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks so much, Andrew. And thank you, everyone, for listening to episode 1 of the Real Kinetic Fitness Podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, and we will talk to you soon.